Chad Hasty Show, News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. Thank you very much for tuning in. We go to the phones and visit with Matt Mackowiak, GOP political strategist. Matt, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great, Chad. Good morning. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for joining us today. Tomorrow, obviously, Election Day here in Texas for the primary election, and we'll start there. What are some of the races that you're going to be watching that you think are some of the more interesting races in Texas that will really define maybe where we're going in this next legislative session?
Well, that's a great question. Look, I think at the statewide level, there are three primaries to watch. There's a Democratic primary for governor. You've got, I think, 7 or 8 candidates running. The Democratic Party is pretty well behind Lupe Valdez. I think there's a chance she finishes second to Andrew White. Her fundraising's been anemic. And so that will portend a more extended Democratic primary, which is not good news for Democrats. Obviously, the Ag Commissioner race and Land Commissioner race are going to be interesting to watch. Does George P. Bush avoid a runoff? And then is Sid Miller in any real danger? Or does that perhaps go to a runoff? I think those are the statewides to watch. But to your question about the legislature, that's a different question. I mean, I'm not sure those statewide races necessarily are going to affect the legislature next year all that much. You have, as you know, Chad, you have a proxy fight between sort of grassroots conservatives and sort of the more mainstream or moderate wing of the party all around the state.
Yeah.
It's happening in Senate races. I just heard an ad from Kel Seliger on your air. Obviously, that's one race where that's happening. There are other state Senate, state House races across the state, probably 30 races in total that are competitive. That could go one way or the other. Some of them are open seats. Some of them are incumbent challenges. So it's going to be interesting to see whether the balance of power changes in any real way. How does it affect an issue like school choice, where there just hasn't been enough support among Republicans in the House to do something on school choice? Do the numbers change in a significant way? What happens with the 3 races where the governor has endorsed against House Republican incumbents? I suspect he'll win one of those 3 tomorrow night. I suspect he'll help defeat Wayne Faircloth down in Galveston with the challenger Mays Middleton, who's raised a pretty good amount of money. But I suspect that Sarah Davis and Lyle Larson will survive. So that'll affect the political capital that the governor will have going into the session potentially.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, if he only wins one, and one of those isn't the Sarah Davis race, which I think a lot of people have been, at least media-wise, that's the one they've been paying attention to. Yeah. Is that good enough for Abbott as far as his political capital?
I think as a political operative, if you sat down and told the governor, listen, we're going to spend whatever it is, $200,000, $300,000 in 3 races, and I think the best we can do is win one of the 3. I would think that the governor would have said, let's not do that.
Right.
But obviously, you don't know. I mean, you think you know, and you can poll, and you can talk to the campaigns and get involved. I think what's interesting about this is that there was a perception that the governor was not following through in some ways on issues like pre-K, where he made promises to members in his first session. And then this session, there was a perception that maybe he was too aggressive in terms of putting 20 items on the special session and now getting involved in some of these primaries against incumbents. And so he's kind of damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. So I'm sensitive to that from his perspective. I think in this case, these 3 incumbents, certainly 2 of the 3 incumbents, really went at him personally and directly. And he felt like he had to defend himself as it related to Sarah Davis and Lyle Larson. But ultimately, look, you've got to recruit first-tier candidates. You have to recruit candidates that fit the district. Those candidates have to run good campaigns. And so, there will be a lot of chatter, I think, about whether the governor has real political power around the state, and particularly inside the Texas House, depending on how these races ultimately go. But we'll see. I mean, I don't know. One out of 3 is not. I don't think is good enough, but it's certainly better than nothing. And obviously, he will have at least won one race.
Matt, this blue wave that people keep talking about, national writers keep talking about in Texas. I know you sent out I discussed it earlier, a link this weekend from, I believe it was the Chicago Tribune, about hold your horses on this whole Beto O'Rourke defeating Ted Cruz type deal. When you look at something like the Democratic primary for governor, to me, there's been no buzz. There's been no news on this. And there was a poll, wasn't there, last week that came out that showed that most Democrats don't even know who they're going to vote for yet in that race? Yeah,
look, I mean, if you're on Twitter, and you're following these things, first of all, Twitter is a very small percentage of people.
Right.
And it's generally people that are highly engaged and highly educated and following things closely. And so sometimes it's easy to think, well, if everybody on Twitter is talking about something, that means everybody's talking about it. And it's just not the case. And as it relates to these Democrats, I mean, Andrew White, I think, has raised about $1 million, a good amount of that he put in himself. But $1 million is wholly insignificant for a statewide primary in Texas, particularly for someone who's not well known. And so, it's better than Lupe Valdez, who I don't even know what she's raised. If she's raised $200,000, I'd be amazed. And so, I mean, the amount that she raised is enough to run for state house, not run for governor. So ultimately, those candidates are not on television. They're not well known. They're, battling over Democratic activists and Democratic groups. And the party is really fully behind Lupe. And my guess is that she may actually be the front runner in the runoff because it'll be a lower turnout, more liberal turnout in some of those groups, and the unions and organizations like that might have more power. But I mean, it's stunning. The Democratic primary for governor has been going on obviously for 3 months, but you're right. Almost no news, really no controversy. There is a contrast between those two candidates, but you haven't heard much about it because neither of them have been able to deliver a message to the voters. Yeah,
I just find it funny that you hear all these national folks who think that there's this blue wave in Texas, and I don't think the Democratic Party insiders believe there is. But there's this fantasy of Texas turning blue, and there's no discussion on the gubernatorial race at all. And we all know that Abbott's going to crush whoever does get the nod on the Democratic side. As far as President Trump goes, last week was an interesting week for the president on the issue of guns, and then with this tariff announcement on, I believe it was Thursday that he made this announcement. I had Senator Cornyn on my show Friday. He kind of pushed back against this idea of tariffs and kind of pushed back even on this on some of the gun control ideas that the president had come up with. Where do you think? What are we hearing from the GOP as far as the tariffs go and with gun control? Where do you think this whole argument goes to now?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, you'd have to look pretty hard to find agreement among elected Republicans with the tariff announcement. Look, it's not a policy yet. It's sort of a preview of a policy. It's not an executive order that he signed. It hasn't been vetted. The lawyers haven't finalized it. But he's basically announced his intention to issue a 25% tariff on all foreign steel and a 10% tariff on all foreign aluminum. And it's unclear whether they're going to carve out any exceptions for allies. They were kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth over the weekend. So, look, there's just not any support for the tariff announcement. Not, outside of the Trump administration on the Republican side, there's no support for it. In fact, Bush tried this, I think, in 2003 before his reelection. It stayed in place for 2 years, and it was pretty unsuccessful, and he rescinded it. So, last week was a weird week. Trump had that meeting on Capitol Hill where he seemed to side with the Democrats on almost everything they wanted on gun control, and then the next day he had lunch with the NRA, and the NRA put a message out saying that the president is against gun control. So I don't know where he stands really on some of these proposals. Ultimately, you're going to have 60 votes in the Senate to do any of these things that the people are proposing, which tells me I think you're going to have a more modest legislative package ultimately on gun control over time. You're going to do the background check bill that Cornyn has. Whether they go beyond that, banning bump stocks, at least they're going to do that through the executive branch. It's unclear whether they do that legislatively as well. We'll see. This is not a good time for the White House to create division with elected Republicans. They need to be unified going into the midterms and for the rest of this year. So I hope it was just a bit of a chaotic week, and maybe they can get back to being unified about their agenda. But it portends certainly some uncertainty going forward.
It just seems to me that the biggest win that the White House has had has been this tax reform plan, and that, people are seeing more money in their pockets, and, depending on what these tariffs look like, everything could go up in prices, cars, beer, just the average everyday things. And if Americans start seeing that go up, it almost hurts that message of we're putting money back in your pockets, and that's not good for the midterms, right?
Yeah, that's one of the arguments that National Economic Council Director Cohn was making Gary Cohn has been making internally, is that, listen, let the good news of the tax reform law take effect. Let the good economic news continue to build. Don't rain on that parade. Certainly not now.
Right.
And I think that he and a number of others inside the White House had set up a certain sort of structure and timetable for some of these decisions. And in fact, they wanted Trump to decide to punish China individually first over intellectual property theft before going to these tariffs. And they hoped that by going after China, he would feel maybe it was unnecessary to do the tariff thing. That's going to be something to watch this week. How does the stock market continue to react to this tariff announcement? Does the market continue to go down? Does it affect other economic indicators, things like consumer confidence? It'd be interesting to watch that. So,
yeah.
I'm a little bit mystified here. They should be letting the tax law work its way into the public psyche. It certainly is doing that through the economy in positive ways. But to sort of step on that, even though, yes, it was a campaign promise, he delivered on it, so we shouldn't be surprised. But, boy, it just seems to kind of contrast with everything they were already trying to do, and that's why strategically I think a lot of people are scratching their head.
Yeah. Matt, tell folks where they can sign up for your newsletter and your next podcast.
Yeah, we do this newsletter every weekday morning called Must Read Texas. We take all the news from around the state, put it into one email, send it to you each morning. You can sign up for a free 7-day trial at mustreadtexas.com. 3,000 Texans get that every day. And our podcast is called Mac on Politics. It's with the Washington Times. You can find it in the iTunes Store, on Google Play, on Stitcher, and on the web at maconpoliticspodcast.com.
Very good, Matt. Thank you very much, and we'll visit with you next week.
Take care, Chad.
That's Matt Mackowiak, Chad Hasty Show, KFYO.